thing on seating. Seating is something that goes on around us all the time. But also this is an ask me anything. So, if it's a therapeutic thing you want to know about, if it's influence and persuasion thing you want to know about, recommendations on good movies or something like that, happy to do that. Um, none of the ones that were up for Oscars, since I didn't see any of them. But in any of it, I didn't even know they were having the Oscars yesterday until I was flicking through the channels. So that is, I have no recommendations on the Oscars, but I have been watching stuff on Amazon and Netflix and, other things. So there's some good shows out there if you wanted to know. But in any event, we're going to be starting with seating and an Ask Me Anything. So in the first part about seating, and the reason why I'm talking about movies and things like that is because seating is one of the most common forms of influence and persuasion that you have around you. And so seating is not necessarily like foreshadowing or anything like that you see in movies. A long time ago, there was something called subliminal advertising. Who here has heard of subliminal advertising?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right. Where they would supposedly flash a product or like a picture that you can't really consciously see, but supposedly it goes in unconsciously. And, they would do it in movies or like on advertisements or something like that. And pretty much they concentrated on sex and death because they figured that's what people are drawn to, sex and death. Well, that is true. If you look at the news, that's pretty much what they cover. But subliminal advertising doesn't really work. I mean, they found, it's one of those great ideas. A long time ago, I was actually at an art show in New York City, right near uh, Lincoln Center on the Upper West Side. So those of you who've been to New York and know the Upper West Side, Lincoln Center is a very nice area, and they had this art show, and this guy had a really, really interesting piece of art that he was selling. I really wish I had gotten it, but this was a long time ago, $30. It's a little bit expensive for a knickknack. But it's actually, it was a little aluminum sculpture of Lenin's head, right? Not John Lennon, the Lenin, the guy from the Soviet Union. Uh, and it was shaped out like a light bulb with his head, right? And so it's basically this aluminum light bulb with Lenin's head. And the piece was called, it was a good idea at the time, right? So essentially it's an idea that doesn't work, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Very cute sculpture. He actually had a lot of really good stuff. Unfortunately, I lost his card, so I couldn't keep in touch with him. But subliminal advertising, attractive idea, didn't work. What does work is seeding. Seeding is something you see all around you. Now, you may have heard of seeding in another way. It's often called product placement, which gets towards the movies and TV and all those types of things, which is very different from advertising. Now, advertising, you see an ad on TV or something like that, you're watching it, and they're saying buy the product, right? Buy a can of Coke, right? You'll have like the polar bear smiling at you, you have them singing, I'd like teach the world to sing and all that type of stuff. You're very iconic commercials. People watch the Super Bowl for the commercials primarily because it's generally better than the game. Those are all what's called direct advertising. So they're saying, look, here's our product. It's interesting, try it out, go buy it. Product placement is different. And this is where the idea of seeding comes in. You'll have people who are just sitting around talking, right? Not having anything to do with the product itself, but on the table, while they're sitting around talking, there'll be a can of Coke. They're not saying buy a can of Coke, but it's there, it's sitting there. They'll be talking about oh, let's go out for a drink, right? So they go to a bar, and you'll see in the back there's like a Budweiser sign or something like that. And it's not in your face conscious, but it's to seed in your mind when you want a product like something to drink, like a soda or a beer. That's going to come back in your mind because all those things are seeded throughout the story, and they're just there. They're just, it's not like it's in your face saying, buy this. This is something that's seeded in there. Now, seeding can happen in a lot of different ways. Product placement is essentially the most common one. And it's just there. If you actually like do a screenshot or do a pause on something you're watching where people are out and about, you'll often see that there's certain things there that are just there, right? And it's not that, people are talking about it. It's not a product endorsement, which is the next step, but it is just there in the background. And you'll unconsciously notice it because it's sitting there. It's not flashing something. It's just there in front of you. Companies pay a lot of money for this type of product placement. And that's how a lot of movies get financed. They have people who go out and actually solicit product placement from all of these things. Now, companies pay more if they talk about that product, or they actually name it by name. But often you'll see it. It's like, say, for example, cars, right? You'll see the character drive up in a certain model car. And oddly enough, you'll always see the badge of the car. It's a Mercedes or a BMW or an Audi or something like that. You'll see it in the shot. And that's just to give you an idea. It's like, you think luxury car, you're going to think of them. Right? So that is the concept of seeding. Now, it's a very interesting thing where you can leverage seeding in that it's often used in things like magic and mentalism as well. And this is with you can see how powerful it is when it works, because you ever see card tricks? You see magicians use card tricks, and it's pretty interesting. They do what's called forcing a card, right? So like the whole thing was like, pick a card, any card, right? They actually are getting you to pick a certain card that they already know. That's how they know which card you picked. And so you'll see them sometimes where they'll take the deck of cards and they'll flip it, right? So you see they riffle through the cards like that. And what they'll do is they say, okay, pick a card, any card, right? But they kind of subtly show you a card, right? So when they do it, they show you a card. They know what card that is. And then when they fan it out, they actually are indicating very subtly to you which one you should pick. So again, that is an example of seeding an idea in your mind that you're going to pick that one, even though it's not, they're not saying directly pick that one. Or like in a mentalism show, a lot of times they'll, if you go to like Las Vegas or something like that, if you've ever been to one of those shows, like a hypnosis show or a mentalism show, you'll go through a certain amount of, it's not like you just walk into the theater. There'll be displays and stuff like that as you go through. And if you really look at it, there'll be certain things on the walls. But if you're just walking through thinking about going to the show, you won't notice what those things are. And yet somehow when that mentalist is saying, okay, so pick a number between, this one and this one, somehow that person gets it right. Well, if you actually go back through those corridors and look at and look at the walls, you'll see that number plastered in different places. where you wouldn't necessarily realize that they're just kind of seeding in your mind. Like, say, for example, when the time comes for the mentalist to pick the number that you're thinking of, and it's a 7, well, you'll see there's like 7s all over the place as you walked in, but you didn't realize that that's what he's seeding. So seeding is, on a basic level, actually is to put the idea into your mind about a certain thing without explicitly talking about that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I had read that as far as the product placement goes,
Mhm.
for ET, they had wanted to use M&Ms, but M&Ms didn't want them to use their products, so they went with
Reese's
the
Pieces.
Reese's Pieces instead, right? And so then Reese's Pieces, they blew up after that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, they're also tasty, but it doesn't hurt. But yeah, exactly. And nobody said eat Reese's Pieces. Oh, Reese's Pieces are better than M&Ms. They just had them eating Reese's Pieces and using them in different shots.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. So that is a real example of seeding, where they're not actually saying buy this. It leads to buy this. Right. So that happens a lot in all different types of influence and persuasion. So if you wanted to say, for example, obviously you're in real estate, Richard's in real estate. The idea that it's a really tight market and it's a hot market is is basically pushing the impetus for people to get into bidding wars, right? Now, the fact is, if you told somebody explicitly, you better bid high, right, in order to get this, that's one thing. But if you're just talking in general, this is the market conditions. These are what the conditions are. Everybody's trying to buy, everybody's trying to sink their money into real estate. So it's basically the market conditions are very hot, right? So all of a sudden it gets the person who wants to buy and hasn't bought thinking, I should get in on this, right? It's seeding that idea that it's blowing up and they're missing out. So seeding goes along very well with the idea, with the fear of missing out. Who here has heard that? FOMO?
FOMO, yeah.
Yeah. It's the fear of missing out. This is the same reason why, people, why they have the countdowns on the digital products and stuff like that, right? It's like, oh, only 2 left. It's like, it's a digital product, right?
Yes.
there, there's no inventory. You just say, you just make a copy, right? That's all it is. So, but seeding the idea of something, take action now, or something like that, or so and so is making so much money by doing this, without saying you should get in on this. It's actually so common in everything with multi-level marketing. It's so common in regular marketing. It's so common in any type of sales, which is not that direct hard sell, right? So if I say, a lot of people uh love this car for these reasons, and stuff like that, and I know your reasons, your criteria and values, which I teach in my book, 5 Keys to Hypnotic Selling, if you haven't gotten it. But it's basically, you can talk about things and seed this type of feeling without saying buy this explicitly. So seeding is an incredibly powerful and actually very common thing. When it's not done well, though, it becomes buy this because of this. It's much more powerful when it's a subtle influence, because basically there's a tenant in Influence and Persuasion, and it's codified by this guy Blair Warren, who's kind of like, he's done some brilliant work and then he disappears. So, but his thing is, one of his things is, people will sometimes believe what you tell them. They will always believe what they conclude. Any questions on that statement?
Can you repeat it again?
People will sometimes believe what you tell them. They will always believe what they conclude. In other words, if you lead the person to a certain conclusion, it's actually their conclusion. It's not the same thing as you telling them something.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if, for example, in a real estate example, I was to say, oh, look, I wish I had gotten into this, this area because, the houses are up 50%, and I missed out on that. But, there's one available, but since I already bought, I'm not going to be buying over here, but there's one available. Well, all of a sudden, right, what's the person concluding is that this is a hot area that maybe they should get in, especially if they were looking. Right? A real estate people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Because that's the conclusion the person is making. It's not the same as I'm saying you should buy this because it's going to go up 50%.
No, you're just giving them information and they're concluding it on their own.
Right. But I'm giving them certain information.
True. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then it's more a matter of, up to your ethics and things like that, where you tell them more about it, whether it's actually a good investment or something they would have to put more money into, to make it better, better value, that type of thing. But those are details. But it's when you're using those broad strokes, that's when the person starts moving in that direction. And so the point is, like with any type of influence and persuasion or any type of therapeutics, it's important not to try to make that jump too big. The jump to the conclusion. It's really a process. When you get the person moving in that direction, they pick up momentum. But it's like, if it's like, okay, now you're smoking 2 packs a day, tomorrow you're going to stop smoking, period. Right? It's a very big jump. It's a very big jump. And so that's where you get people where they say, okay, it didn't work for me. It's because that type of movement is too large. The gap is too large. And that's one of the things that we're thinking in terms of, what is the process we set the person on, and they build up momentum going on there because it's their own idea. It's their own conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Richard? Is Richard there? Or is he not there?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Tim, how about you? Any questions?
No, I just didn't know what seeding was before tonight.
Okay. So if you're using seeding in more of a therapeutic type of situation, I would talk about stories about how people learn to think differently. Say, hey, have you ever, changed your mind about something? Because, I mean, there are things I was certain about when I was a little kid that, like certain things I liked and certain things I didn't like. And one of the things that I always knew was I was going to live in New York forever, because I'm from New York and from Manhattan. How many people are actually from Manhattan? But I was born and raised in Manhattan. And it's really something that I never thought I'd live somewhere else, until, of course, I ended up in San Diego. Right? And it turns out that I actually wrote a blog at the time after I had moved, and after I had been there for a while, because I didn't even give up my apartment in New York, right? Right? You know, because the idea was if I didn't like it, I could move back. But it turned out that, you know what, the things that I thought I was missing in New York, I could actually get, you know, out where I am. And that's so I wrote a blog called They Got Good Stuff There, you know, because it was really, Amazon was ramping up, and, you know, you have national brands and all that type of stuff. And so many of the things that I thought I would miss, I actually could get out there, or something equivalent. And then it becomes appreciating what you have and where you want to go, as opposed to what you don't have and what you're giving up. And sometimes those things that you give up are things that are okay for you to give up. Right? So in a therapeutic sense, that's actually a good way to start massaging the mind.
Right.
To get
I,
them to change.
I can actually see using that to start talking somebody into giving up some habits.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but that's not talking about giving up habits.
Right. It's just talking about changing your mind and finding that there's other good things out there.
Right. And that's where seeding comes in. So you felt it emotionally, you felt the feeling
Mm-hmm.
without actually somebody hitting you over the head and saying, now you're going to change.
Right. It takes a lot of hits to the head to actually make somebody change.
Yes, but they will always believe what they conclude,
Right.
because it's their idea. And so that's why it's important to get the criteria and values in order to be able to speak to them, and to also be able to talk in terms of seeding. So I would say when you want to use seeding in certain things, and, you know, it takes a little practice to think in those terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can I would say, put together some stories that you can use, just like the one I just told, which is very general, right? Which it's not talking about specifics, but it's also talking about something in general, like changing a mindset, or
Mm-hmm.
changing an idea, or accepting a change, right?
Mhm.
So if you start putting together stories around that, that would actually be something that you could just pull out at any time and start using them until it becomes natural for you to tell these stories. I just came up with that because for me, it's natural to talk in those terms.
Mm.
And that comes from, you know, but I would say when you're beginning, do 3 stories or something, yeah, in general, that you can pull out, and it becomes very comfortable for you to tell them. And it doesn't matter if somebody heard it before or somebody used it with somebody else. If it's appropriate, that's great, because after a while, you could take elements of story 1 and elements of story 3, combine it together, you have a new story. Because it's a story. It's not reporting. It's a story. And so, say for example, with Richard and you know, in real estate, you know, well, both of you guys are in real estate, right? So I would say, if you wanted to think in terms of somebody having you know, something seeding around being able to make a quick decision, right? So somebody, you know, when they see a property, they have to make, realistically in this market, they have to make a quick decision. They're going to put an offer in or not,
Mhm.
right?
Right, right.
So I would talk about other times, you know, when you had to make a quick decision, or times when you had to, maybe when you missed out on something, like, okay, so I'll give you a real estate one for when I was looking, you know, and it's always good to be able to pull from your own experiences, because what happens then is you lower the boundaries that keep you from gaining rapport with the person. The more you share of yourself, the more rapport you have with the other person, which is in my second book, Influential Rapport. But, you know, what we're doing is, we essentially, I was looking at properties and I saw a really, I mean, this house was totally done with a couple of cosmetic exceptions that I didn't love, but I could have lived with them. So I wouldn't have had to put anything realistically into this house, or very little. And they were asking, roughly 550 for a house. It's quite a large house. It's, like, I think it was like 1,600 square feet with like a quarter acre. I mean, it was a really beautifully done house. And so I went in there. I was very impressed with it. But, you know, and it turns out that the guy was under a lot of pressure to sell. So, what happened is that because he had bought another house, he had a large family, and this is a 4-bedroom house, it was, all done, but he apparently needed like a 6-bedroom house. So he had bought another house and he's carrying 2 mortgages. So I could have gotten this house, and it turns out it sold for about 500. I could have gotten this house and the appreciation would have been really, really good on it. But I'm from New York City and I saw a quarter of an acre and it's like, God, I don't want to mow the lawn. I hate mowing the lawn. So I just sat on the fence on it. And then I saw, the house that I eventually got. And I actually liked the people who were selling because they worked for the company that I work for, except they were moving back to England and all that. So it was mostly cosmetic stuff, but I wouldn't have to take care of a lawn or anything like that. I pay an HOA to do that. They don't do a great job, but that's another story. So basically, sometimes I still look back on that and, I kind of regret that I didn't buy that. Because again, the investment value would have been really good. Now, what's seeding in that story? It's like the fear of missing out, right? Well, I did miss out on that one, so there's no fear on that. I don't necessarily regret that I didn't buy it from an emotional standpoint, but from an investment standpoint, I, kind of wish I did, because I'd be calling you guys up and selling it right now.
Yeah.
You know, because I probably sell that. I probably make like $150,000, easily off of that profit. So, it's just one of those things that I can pull out these stories because, again, I know where I want to go in general, but I'm sharing my own experience, which gets back towards you can tell stories that aren't directly related to the way you want that person to think, but they're somewhat related because it seeds in their mind the direction you want to go, which is different from directly telling them to do something. Does that make sense? Because you're overcoming the resistance by not telling them directly.
So once you know their criteria, how do you seed in the criteria as you move forward?
Well, give me an example, Richard.
So you know that somebody wants to come to a coaching company, coaching, because they want to make more money and they want to be the breadwinner in the house, because right now the wife's making all the money and they want to be feeling like, that the man in the house is taking care of their family.
Okay, so are those the criteria for the person? So, okay, so then, you'd have to go a little bit deeper on that about, what's important about them not being, them taking part of the responsibility for making money. But you could talk about it in terms of things like, I still, even though I do a lot of coaching, obviously we have a meetup where I'm talking, incessantly, it seems. But, I do a lot of coaching and I do a lot of other things to help optimize people. But for me, the journey is not over. I still go to different events. I still do, go to learn from people who are some of the best. I'm going to be going to Orlando, because Richard Bandler's having a special thing where it's actually going to be broadcast to Europe. So I'm going to be there to be in the audience. I'll pick up some more things. And I do that, A, because I'm on his training team. And so it was only certain people who were invited, but B, because it gives me the opportunity to see what he's doing and to break down what he's doing even more. Additionally, I've spent, I think I spent something like almost $20,000 last year for my own coaching, to get better in my own coaching. And I've picked up a lot of things about communication, a lot of things going into some of the areas in personal development that I'll be putting out something on. But I had to learn a lot of those things separately and to get different eyes on the same the same problems. It gives me a lot of flexibility in how to really connect with people. And so, yes, the hypnosis and the NLP approach, I have that. That's the framework that I use. But some of the details, some other people have come up with some great things and some things that are incredibly effective that I'm incorporating into what I do. And so I think it's really important to always be able to increase your value when you go into different types of programs and things like that. And, that's just my approach. And so I just recommend it just as a career development and as a personal development thing to always take the opportunities when you can. Does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah, nice suggestion at the end. Indirect.
Right. So this is all very indirect, but it's to move that person from the idea, to the idea, well, what do you get out of it? And, what could you get out of it and what you might be missing if you don't, and it's not saying take this particular one. I just say in general, you know, because of my experience, a lot of people sometimes they stop. And I don't think that you can ever stop because you never know where somebody's going to have a better idea, better approach, or a better approach in a certain area that you can incorporate. So set the ego aside and just pick up stuff and evaluate it. You have to have a good way to evaluate. Now, an interesting thing is, how do you evaluate somebody who's good, right? So this is something that I learned a long time ago when I studied martial arts, and I'm an instructor in martial arts, is that you have to, know what works, what's going to work well, right? So there's certain basics that you could tell somebody if something works well. Somebody's off balance all the time, generally they're not good. So yeah, it's like any type of sport, any type of dancing, or anything like that. If their footwork is no good, they're probably not good. If they're off balance, they're not good. If they put themselves in bad positions, they're not good. The second thing is you have to enjoy it, because it's got to be something that you're going to keep doing, right? So you'll never get good at something if you don't keep doing it. So if you don't like NLP, you're not going to keep doing it. If you don't like hypnosis or a certain approach to hypnosis, well, you may like hypnosis, but you may not like that approach. So I would say there's other approaches as well. And so that's why it's important to get good at something, right? You have a strong foundation in something, then you can figure out if other stuff will work with what you already know. Then you're not starting from scratch all the time. You're not doing things in silos. That's, for me, that's I hate doing things that way, which is kind of how I've grown my career, where I've basically taken a skill set and just applied it in different places and grown out from there, as opposed to starting discreetly in different areas, because ultimately it takes up a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I think there's just more to offer when you have a base set of skills that you can transfer to other places. Does that make sense? Because, yes, go ahead.
was going to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, because essentially, anything, your skills in real estate, it's essentially deal making, it's essentially sales, it's client service, it's creating relationships with people. These are core things that a lot of people, unfortunately, these days don't have because they spend all their time on the phone. Well, actually texting on the phone. They're not even on the phone. They're not even talking to people. Tim, any questions on this stuff?
No.
Well, so any questions on seating?
No, just gonna have to play with how to start applying it to talk people into doing what they need to do anyway.
Well, again, it's right. So think of it this way, right? As a hierarchy, right? So they're at this level where, okay, they have their problem,
Mhm.
right? And that's where they are. And so how do you get them to think differently, right? So it's not about talking them into doing something else. It's really about getting them to think differently about it.
Right. Getting them to have a little bit of, okay, just a different framework so they can come up with the idea that they need anyway in the first place.
Well, that's where you start, right? And then you can get into more of the direct type of things. But you've got to kind of soften the ground a little bit, right? Because right now they're used to practicing their problem.
That's a fantastic way of putting it.
Well, they've often been doing it for years and years and years, right? So they're very good at it, right? Because they practice it.
Impressively.
Right. So when you get you have to soften them up a little bit, right? So just the idea where you can soften them up through a little bit of a story like we did, right? Where you're seeding stuff. Or you can do something where you just interrupt that pattern and slide stuff in, right? So that's also something you can do where you interrupt the pattern and then start indirectly moving them, right? But the whole thing is you have to interrupt the pattern, right? So one way you do it is softer. Another way you do it is just confront it directly, right? So give me an example, right? Where you come up with it, that you get.
Basically, patients whose posture is what's causing all their problems. They slump in their chair, they lean forward, and it can even give them trouble breathing if they lean forward too much and have their head too far forward. It'll pinch off some nerves. So I've dealt with some people before where by them changing their posture, they're able to radically improve their health.
Right. So that's fairly direct, right?
Right.
So you have somebody who you see that they can improve their posture and improve their health, right? And generally they haven't.
Right.
Okay. So if you just said, well, has it ever occurred to you to like sit up straight?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that in arm's reach.
No, but realistically, they'll generally the answer will be no.
Right.
Well, let's try it. Right, because it's in that instant, right, where you've interrupted the pattern that they don't know what to say.
Okay. That makes really good sense.
For a second. Here, let me just move you here for a second.
Right.
Now take a deep breath. How does that feel? Right, and that's where you get started, right? Because then all of a sudden you're getting a little momentum on doing something different.
Okay,
Or
getting
you
a little
can
bit of
talk to
class.
them. It's like, yeah, I've had clients, it's like they were doing this all the time. And I said, has it ever occurred to you not to do that? And it's like, you'd be surprised how often the answer is no. And yet when they just do that one little thing, it just starts getting them right back onto track where all of a sudden it becomes very easy. And they start feeling a lot better. Oh yeah, that sounds like it's really good. Great. You want to try it? Let's do one thing. Right. And because you don't do everything at once, right?
No.
Right. So you do the first thing and then all of a sudden it feels better. And that's where the idea of convincers come in. And that's where you get momentum. And it's the same thing in a sales situation where you're not, again, making that big jump, but you're getting, okay, you wanted this, this, and this. It's checking off those criteria, right? And so isn't this better than what you asked for?
Mm.
Right. And all of a sudden, yeah, it is actually. Okay, so let's go with this for a little bit.
Okay.
Right. So that's why it's, it's like, well, another idea in that situation, right, where the posture is not good and they're not breathing right. It's like,
Mhm.
well, do you like it? No, it's terrible. It's like, okay, well, would you like to try something else? Yeah, that's what I'm here. Good.
Mm.
Right. So again, that's where you start them off on that just by getting a little momentum in the other direction. So sometimes you can confront them with it and sometimes you can go with it. So it's like, so it feels good when you're doing that, right? It's like, well, no, it doesn't. It's like, then why are you doing it? Seems like it would be painful to me, but
Mhm.
everybody's different. I would think if we just change this a little bit, right, and just move them into that spot, then all of a sudden they'll feel better.
It's actually things I have used. I just didn't quite have the framework on it, so that makes it a lot easier to work with.
Yeah. And again, it's taking the little steps, right? Because what you do, you can't do it that much, like all of a sudden it's like from here to there. You have to,
Yeah. People ask, like, can you fix it all the way once? I'm like, yeah, but you're not going to get up ever again.
yeah, but you won't like it. So let's just do this. Let's take the steps. And you can explain to them the reason why, because the muscles are used to holding in certain spot, and they have to be retrained and all that type of thing. But when they just do certain little things that are very easy, it'll all go back into where it wants to be. Right. So any other questions on seating? Seating is all around us. It's all around us. That's how politics works. That's how, sometimes that's how wars work. Anybody who remembers the Spanish American Wars, thinking of the Lusitania and all that type of thing, the press actually seeded a lot of that stuff in, things like, the whole thing with the yellow peril, the anti-communism things and all that stuff. Even the whole things, those of you who do remember the Kuwait War. Does anybody remember that? The build up to the, Desert Storm and Desert Shield back in the 90s. Well, they were talking about like, oh, they were taking babies out of incubators and just letting them die and all that type of stuff. It was all going into the idea that, these guys are really bad guys, right? Saddam Hussein's a really bad guy. Yeah, everybody knows he's a really bad guy, but these are, atrocities, right? And actually, none of that stuff happened. That actually wasn't true. The girl who testified in front of Congress actually had not been in Kuwait. She was like, like one of the government officials' daughters. She was in the U.S. So there's no way she could have seen it. Again, not to say he was a good guy, he wasn't, but it's how they seed information, they seed the idea that we have to get rid of this guy now. And we have to do whatever we have to do to get rid of him. So it's influential in all types of different areas in politics and, just about everything that's going on with us, right now. And so right now, because of certain actions, the idea of cancel culture, people having to watch what they say, being politically correct and all that type of stuff, people are self-censoring because they have it seeded in their head that they're going to get canceled, on on social media and things like that. And it's happened a lot, but it hasn't, I think, happened quite as much unless people are really blatant about it. So that's unfortunate that that's going on. But, this is an open forum, so you guys can say whatever you want. So any other questions on seating? I'd say be aware of it, just be aware of it, because it'll sharpen your senses on how to use it as well. Guys, anything? Okay, so yeah, yes. Harry,
No, I
yeah.
was gonna say no, no, everything's, I understand. And I'm sitting here thinking about it like, oh yeah, there are things that you see or I see and hear that are seeds that people are planting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I would suggest if you're going to use it, pull out a couple of stories for yourself. And again, it's just to get the idea moving in that direction that you want it to go. And I would say take 3 stories, and just remember, after a certain point, you'll be able to mix elements of the different stories in, because they're just stories. And when you have 3, that gives you multiples that you can pull the different pieces out of. So any questions on that?
I was going to ask that how to get better, but I think you answered it because of the stories.
Yeah, the first suggestion I have is be open on a story. You don't have to be the hero of the story all the time. I mean, for our egos, we kind of like to have to be the hero, right? But it could be a story where you messed up. And that sometimes that works too, where you didn't take advantage of something. Like, so Richard, you were talking about your the coaching program, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So in the coaching program, have you ever missed out on a coaching program that actually you kind of thought, wow, I should have taken that?
Yeah.
Right. So you could talk about that story too.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not always, I took this program and I became really great at this and all. It's like, and I've taken programs before that ultimately I think did not give me what I wanted, but that led me to something else that was better. So there's another one for you. And we're talking about, human experience here, because it's when you're talking about human experience, you can use that, as opposed to always, again, it's okay not to be the hero of your own story. Sometimes that story is more about what you learned out of it. Does that make sense?
Very good.
Okay, so I guess we can go into the Ask Me Anything portion. Yeah, have any questions on anything that not just today, but in some of the past ones? Or
What
anything?
keeps you still interested in taking, more classes? It's very, very admirable. Interesting.
Well, because otherwise you get stale. Right? So Richard, unmute your mic if you would. Let's talk this through. Richard?
What was that, sorry?
Yeah, just keep your mic unmuted for a bit. Let's talk this through, right? So I know you're always learning as well. For me, I always like to look at different ways to, to kind of sharpen what I'm doing. So one of the things that I've actually have right now from some of the things that I've been experiencing and learning is a new communication model. So it's more macro than understanding criteria and values and tonality and things like that. But I already have those pieces. It's more in understanding how really good conversations work and how they push boundaries and things like that. That's going to be part of the new communication model I'll be putting out as well. But I didn't come up with it, and it's something that I actually learned during one of the things that I was one of the courses I was taking. And I think it's the application of that that's been really, really useful and helpful to take the skill sets that I already had to the next level. Does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah.
So how do you
Right.
continue to be
Interesting.
effective, right? It's you have to, I think, really apply the skill sets you have in new areas. And sometimes that also includes, picking up new skill sets where, maybe in some of the things that we had been doing, we're no longer as effective as we were. And, it's either sometimes it's getting back to the basics, sometimes it's having a fresh idea or a fresh model to play with. Sometimes it's a difference in who you're communicating with. Right now, if you're communicating with, say younger people, right, they communicate a little bit differently. Does that
Yeah, they
make sense?
do.
Yeah. So right now, more texting is
Yeah.
it's texting is much more common than it used to be. Um, it's not the same as having good phone skills, but it's a slightly different skill set. And and that's part of this communication model. I've actually had to refine the way I text as well. So
Really?
yeah, that doesn't come out of nowhere. So again, I don't think that I mean, I don't invent everything that I use, and I do refine it to the way I do things. But a lot of the concepts, if I'm not out there, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who's coming up with great things. So that keeps me interested in looking for great things, and sometimes making a pretty heavy investment in it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's like I looked at face reading or reading
Yeah.
physically.
Yeah.
Does it work?
I'm sorry you broke up.
Does it work? Like, because it seems kind of out there.
Well, it's a very ancient type of skill set. Face reading. It's an old Chinese skill set. Um, it does work to a certain degree. I mean, a lot of it's empirical, but it gives you a place to start. I think like
Right.
anything else, if you correlate enough information, you tend to get general tendencies. I think the just like anything else, like when you're doing eye accessing cues, when you're doing face reading, when you're doing a lot of the other things, I would suggest that you actually calibrate to that person. So it gives you a place to start. It's not something that's going to be everybody who has this is like this. It gives you kind of a hypothesis that
I
maybe
like
that's what the person is going through. Let's check it out. Does that make sense?
nice. Yeah, I like that.
Right. So it essentially, most people, right, when they're approaching somebody else or they're meeting somebody else, and both you and Harriet are both are both, I think, uh, you meet a lot of people, right? So
Yeah.
you've met a lot of people who are socially awkward. I'm sure. And so when you
Yeah.
meet people who are socially awkward, you're kind of, they don't know where to start, right? So something like face reading is something that would give them a place to start. You know, it, it's kind of like getting them a little bit of confidence to say hello. You know? And it doesn't mean that everybody who has a certain line on their face or whatever is like that. Again, it goes back to, well, let's get started with this and see where it goes. And it may not be correct, and that's okay. But you've already made the contact with the person. Hello, Phil. Welcome.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, thank you, sir.
We are on the Ask Me Anything portion since we've finished seating, which you'll be able to see on the replay. It'll be posted. Question is, what would you like to ask? What would you like to know? What would you like to cover?
I am one of David's guys, and he talked about you forever, and I wanted to come and find more about you.
Well, I'm here. So what questions would you have? Because this isn't Ask Me Anything.
I am always looking at new and different ways of influence. And it's sales influence, as well as just general talking to people, and how subtly to be able to influence a conversation in your direction.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great. So basically, we talked about seeding earlier, which I think you'll enjoy, because seeding is a softer way to get a person started in that direction. Basically, with the way I come about it is, you have to take certain steps, right, before you build momentum to getting the person to change their mind or to be influenced, or and it could be anything in sales, or it could be anything in therapeutics, or in any other type of area. It's basically the person is where they are, and in order to move them, you have to start breaking that inertia from where they are to getting them to move in a new direction. And in order to do that, you have to start slowly and build that momentum up, because I'm sure, Phil, you're one of David's guys. You've seen how a lot of people, they want to make this drastic change, after like one session, and then they say things don't work. Well, that's because it takes a little bit to move them in that direction. And that's why it's important to, in any type of, say, sales thing, especially when it's a high ticket item. We have Harriet and we have Richard, and they're in real estate. You're talking about a lot of money, right? So right now there's certain things going on where in the US it's a buyer's market. It's a seller's market, where so people, really want to jump quickly. But if somebody's thinking about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's very difficult sometimes for them to make that quick decision. So it's important to start getting them used to making decisions quickly, step by step. Well, is this something that you would be interested in, exploring? Otherwise, we can go somewhere else. Yes. Then you get, okay, so this has, the number of bedrooms that you like, right? Yes. Okay. That's when you start training them to say yes to you. And so you're doing smaller decisions so they can start making quicker decisions, and they get conditioned to doing that. And it's the same thing in therapeutics often, where it's not making that huge jump, it's making the smaller changes that set the person on the direct course. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I like the connection between the therapeutic and the general side thing as well. That's great.
Well, I have to tell you, in my model, they're not really any different, because it's essentially not this. So, it's when you're doing sales or influencing somebody, you're taking them from where they are to where you want them to go. And
Yeah.
so hopefully where you want them to go is where they want to go too. So essentially, there's no point in trying to persuade somebody if it's against what they want.
Yep.
It's not worth it. You can, but they probably won't be happy with you unless it ties in with those criteria and values that they have. Have you seen the stealth selling secrets videos?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you haven't? Oh my goodness.
I'm being truthful.
They're really good.
Okay. All right.
That's why David talks about them, because we actually did a couple. They were really, really good. But a lot of it goes down towards really being able to elicit the criteria and values. I cover that in the 5 keys to hypnotic selling, and things about stories and things I cover in influential rapport, where you essentially, when you're gaining rapport, this is what I've come to after doing the book and all that. It's those boundaries that you have to protect yourself. And this goes for all of us. Those are the boundaries that keep us from connecting with people as well. But those boundaries are actually in our control. And so it's the ability to lower boundaries and go first that allow the other person to create rapport with you as well. So it's not all just a one-way street. Rapport is a two-way street.
Yeah, definitely.
And so when we talk about some of the things we talked about in seeding and use of story, in some of the previous ones, those are areas that actually, when you share of yourself, right? When you actually share stories from your life, and again, they don't have to be, you're not reporting. This is not, the biography channel and all that. You can pull different stories or different parts of stories that illustrate pieces of your life to, that you want to illustrate to the other person. That's where you get to actually start putting these things together dynamically in order to move them from one spot to another spot. And we talked about that, how we do with seeding, which is a more indirect influence, or you can talk about it in terms of story, which you can find on the other meetups. They're all recorded, Phil, by the way, so you can see them either on YouTube or on Facebook. Yeah, so you can just check those out. But they, you're either influencing directly or indirectly. A lot of times, seeding is really good especially when you have somebody who's pretty stuck in their position, or you have to actually soften them up a little bit before you go direct. Because, David probably talked about it. I always talk about it. Blair Warren's axiom is very true. People will sometimes believe what you tell them. They will always believe what they conclude. So when you move them to a conclusion, that it becomes their idea.
Yes, I remember that now.
But and it's true, and that's when you talk about criteria and values. When you talk about all those other areas, that's where a person really embraces that idea as their own. And when they do that, then it's just directing them into the right spot.
Yeah, I must admit, one of the issues that I still have is converting and bringing people to the practice.
Okay, well, let's play with that for a bit. This is an Ask Me Anything. So what practice are you talking about, Phil?
Therapy practice.
Oh, a therapy practice. Okay, yeah. So here's the question. What type of therapy practice, if I may ask?
Hypnotherapy.
Okay.
I'm also doing some therapy with with equine, but that's
Okay.
the same but different.
Well, it's no different. You're talking to people.
Yeah, I'll pay that.
So I would suggest that if you can leave your mic open for a moment, we can talk
Yeah,
about
sure.
this. Okay, so we're talking about how to bring people into it. Well, first of all, like, how are you meeting them?
That's the interesting question. That's the question.
Okay,
It's
so
getting defined to qualify to bring them across.
right. So here's the thing. What types of things do you generally help people with?
A lot of anxiety,
Okay.
PTSD, those sort of areas.
Right. So the question is, are you putting out information in order for them to get to know you as somebody they want to work with?
I have been, but I haven't always been happy with the quality of the information I've been putting out.
Okay, so what's wrong with the quality of information?
I'm good at talking, less good at writing. Does that make it easy?
You didn't do video.
Yeah. And that's what I'm starting to get. I know. And that's what I've been working on. And I think YouTube channel is probably the next thing that I need to start looking at.
Yeah. And just start putting out good information for people and say, hey, contact me if you want to learn more.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, if you're better at talking than writing, I would suggest that you just also record what you're saying, right? And then have it transcribed, which is pretty cheap. It's electronic now.
Oh, yeah.
And then just edit it into something and put it out, with the transcription.
Yeah.
And then you're hitting all the different areas.
Yep. I've got a friend who has a successful practice, and one of the things that he did was he got a lot of blog writing, but he used ghostwriters out of Asia to do most of the writing.
You could do that, yeah. I mean, I mean, they have different things that it depends whether you want to attach yourself to it. If he's got good people, then yeah, I would contact him, see if he'll share. See how good a friend he is, Phil.
Yes,
But
I've thought about that.
Yeah, put it out there. Get yourself out there. Get yourself. Again, it comes out to, do people know who you are and what you could do? And things will. I would suggest you write a book. That's why I wrote. One of my clients came to me because they found me on Facebook. They liked the book, and then they saw some of the other stuff I've done, and they're continuous clients. So on the sales side, so I continue to help them, and their sales are 7 figures increase. So
wow, yeah, it's just the getting through to people, and there's some very good and simple ideas. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and just like all of us, we have to get our presence out there. This is one of the reasons why I do this. Just so to get it out there, and also to give back because it's free. If I can give some people some good information that they can make some, progress on, that'll be great. And you never know what'll happen out of it. So, again, this is an Ask Me Anything. You guys have any other questions? Mark, got a question? Mark joined us late. He was on a Zoom call.
Good evening, everybody. I apologize, my late entrance. I was on another Zoom call for work, and I missed a big chunk, apparently.
Well, that's okay. You can see it on the replay. It's all on the seating part.
In regarding seating, was my assessment correct, what I sent you?
Not quite.
Oh, like that video, that wasn't part of it?
No.
That video example?
No. Oh. Not really.
Okay, so I gotta go to
more. That was No, that was more like, no, because there was no influence there to it, so the whole point is of seeding is to influence the person to think a certain way. So that wasn't quite, that was more misdirection, more foreshadowing that you would see. Seeding is more in terms of things like you would see with James Bond doesn't wear a Rolex anymore, he wears an Omega, but that was more direct because Omega paid them to say it. But like Audi, right? He drives an Audi now, he doesn't drive an Aston Martin, because you see him pull up in an Audi, that type of thing. You'll see the whole thing on the replay.
Okay.
Any
Yeah,
other
that
questions? This is a pretty open forum at the moment, so I encourage all of you guys to just ask whatever you want.
You mentioned convincers.
Yes.
Can you describe convincers in normal everyday conversation?
Okay, so convincers are, again, they help you along the way when you're doing any type of influence and persuasion or therapeutics, right? So convincers, all of you probably have seen stage hypnosis shows. So when they do the quote unquote hypnotic tests, right? Those are just convincers. So the whole thing is when you have your fingers together like this and you're squeezing as tight as you can, and then you look between your fingers and your fingers are like magnetically attracted to each other, right? So that is what's called a convincer, because guess what? Physiologically, your tendons will actually start pulling those fingers together. So physiologically that works, but psychologically it's a convincer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does.
Right.
Yep.
So you ever see somebody get hypnotized and then you put them between two chairs and they're, and then, they're stiff with full body catalepsy type of deal, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That physics wise, it works. The person doesn't have to be hypnotized to do that. But it convinces them that there's a strong hypnotic phenomenon going there.
Interesting.
Just is. So I don't recommend people do that. I think it's, people can get hurt doing that, but it's a convincer. So basically, if I start moving somebody through in say a sales process, right? So, Richard, if you know the criteria, right? And you're hitting them along the way, it's like, isn't this, okay, so they want it like 3-bed, 3-bath, a large backyard, that type of thing, right? So yeah, isn't this third bedroom, really good, because there's another extra room actually that you can use as a fourth bedroom. Oh yeah, that's really it. So that's a convincer, right there. So yeah, it doesn't have 3 baths, it has 3.5, which makes it more convenient. Well, that's a convincer, right? Right, but so there are certain things that you bring up to remind them, and they're agreeing with you. Those are convincers as well. Does that make sense, Richard?
I get it.
Yeah, it does.
Right. So as you're moving a person along, that makes more sense. So if you're using it in therapeutically, right? So as they're confirming their experience, right? So you tell them what they're going to feel, right? So say, for example, they're sitting in the chair and they're going to feel relaxed. Okay. So as you sit there in the chair and you close your eyes, you'll notice your breathing starts to slow down and you feel even more relaxed, right? So you're telling them that and they feel that that's a convincer. Right. And as I bring your arm up, you're going to have, your arm is going to be, stiff like like it's made out of, like you've got a steel bar running through it, right? When you do that full, you know, you do arm catalepsy or something like that, it's a convincer. So the more you do that, the more convinced they are they're hypnotized, the more they're going to accept your suggestions.
Yeah.
Right, Phil?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Those are all, yeah, those are all convincers. That's
Yeah.
why you start with small phenomenon and then you build it up, because you gain momentum. Same thing with the sales process. In sales, it's called building a yes set,
Building a,
but it doesn't
what was
have
it?
to be a yes set.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be as blatant as that. Because when you're talking to the criteria and values and you know you've got them and you're meeting them, then that becomes one big yes set without having to have the person confirm it. They'll confirm unconsciously when you hit them. Yeah, when you're doing a direct hypnosis or something like that, it's very easy to build up convincers. And it's sometimes, for some people, important. That's why it's important to be flexible on the type of induction. So, like, the typical Elman induction, some people expect that. Yeah, that's what they expect. Otherwise they don't feel they're hypnotized. It's like, well, that's fine, I'll use that, I don't care. I don't necessarily do it exactly that way, but it's the format that they're comfortable with, and happy to do it that way. Or even progressive relaxation, it's like, that's not my preferred way to do it, but it's having that flexibility that allows you to hook into what they want, that allows you to build that, the convincers and the yes set for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So using a whole bunch of different things it's just a way to help them get to where they want to go. And sometimes it's more interesting just to play with stuff. Okay. Another question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What the other day I was listening to something on YouTube, and for somehow the moderator on that video I was watching, it seemed like he was speaking normal, but he put me into a trance. Like, and I was like wondering, how do you like create that kind of a voice that could do that? I mean, like, how did he do
Okay.
that?
Well, because he has a trained voice. So basically, anybody who's a well-trained broadcaster generally has a really good voice, especially on radio, because that's what, they have to be a little bit better because you can't see them. You notice that, people, I don't know if you've ever listened to sports on the radio or,
Yes.
okay, so they're really good at describing stuff to make it very vivid for you. So the way they describe it, and I remember when I was a kid, sometimes, they blacked out games and stuff like that. So, baseball games, right? When you listen to these guys really broadcast the baseball game, you get that feeling of excitement. It's like you're there, and they bring you into that world. So part of it is their tonality, right? So you want to learn how to train your voice a little bit better. First thing is to practice breathing from your diaphragm and relaxing your throat muscles. And that's how you create better timbre, just like I'm speaking to you now. And it creates a certain resonance in your voice that is helpful when you're doing any type of hypnosis or NLP, any type of influence and persuasion work. Second thing is to start really practicing your tonality, which we did before, Mark, where it's
Yes.
the downward tonality in the right spots. Knowing which tonality you're using is very important. Knowing when you want to have a question, knowing when you want to have a statement, and knowing when you want to have a command, and really being able to control that is important. Third thing is the rhythm that you're speaking at. So you have to slow down. You tend to speak quickly.
Yes.
And sometimes it's important to slow down and leave spaces between the words, because that allows the person to catch up and really process what you're saying, as opposed to it just going by too fast. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good.
I do notice that about myself.
Well, this is where if you breathe between the words, you'll allow yourself to just relax and slow down and let your words have more effect, because it's not the number of words you're using. It's the way they have an impact on the other person.
Wow. Makes sense. Yes.
Right. So, and that's the way you train yourself to become a better speaker. And we can go over that as well. But it's
Okay.
really talking in rhythm and matching your breathing to that. Is any questions on that?
Something to work on.
There's
I
always
love this subject. I love this subject a lot.
right. So it's a little bit different, Richard, because for you, you have a little bit of an accent. I know where you're from originally, which is actually helpful. But sometimes you tend to rush your words a little bit too.
Mm.
So when you're thinking in terms of slowing down and leaving space between the words, then you are actually going to have more impact, because you can emphasize things more to the person you're talking to.
Nice.
Well, let's try it. Let's try it a little bit. Harriet, you want to try it?
Yeah.
What would you like me to say?
Well, just start talking a little bit more in rhythm and slowing down just a little bit.
So a little something like this.
Well, it's not slowing down the words, it's just leaving more space between them.
Okay. But not this much space.
Well, depending on what it is, it might be. Because when you leave yourself space, you can speak faster or you can speak slower, depending on what you want to convey.
Okay. I can try that and see how it works.
That was actually really good.
Okay.
You see how it has more impact than I can try that and see how it works, right?
Mhm,
You say,
right.
I can try that and see how it works.
Yeah, I see. I do. So I'll
Good.
practice that some more.
Yeah, exactly. And it's timing it with the breathing, and maybe we can do one on that, a full one on that. That'll be interesting. Phil, you want to give it a shot? Phil, you're on mute. Phil? Oh, maybe Phil is.
Sorry, I'm still here.
Ah,
It's tomorrow morning with me, and I'm out doing the stables.
I see. Well, in that case, hopefully you'll have some help, because it's a lot of work.
Oh, it's all right. Help is just arriving.
Even better. So you want to give that a shot, speaking a little bit more in rhythm and slowing down a little bit.
It's always really important to make sure that the words that you use work correctly together.
Right, exactly. You know, and that's why it's not just a matter of speed, because you can talk fairly quickly and still speak in rhythm, because it's all in how you control it, as opposed to just going on at the same speed all the time. Because when that happens, person kind of gets too used to it. There's not enough variance there for the person to pay attention to you. Mark, you want to give it a shot?
This is very, I got to think of the word too. This is very revealing. Like I said earlier, like we agreed earlier, I speak too fast. Now I'm being to realize that I need to slow down and practice both rhythmic speaking and the tonality aspects of it to have a more impact.
Right. Well, you don't have to speak slow all the time, because it just has to be when you're making the point that you want to make. Just like that. Because sometimes you may want to speak fast, especially if you're excited about something. Like if you're excited about a new opportunity and things that you want to get across to somebody, let me tell you about this new opportunity because I think this could be really helpful for you. So you notice I don't only speak slow. Sometimes I speak fast, depending the way on what I'm trying to convey to you.
So speed is not a factor when it
Well,
comes
it
to
is
like
when
the
it's
rhythm speaking and also the tonality aspect of it.
well, it is when you're always fast.
Yes, that is true.
You know, that's a problem when you're always fast. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to break you guys into a couple of breakout rooms. Just take a minute or two to speak to each other in rhythm. Is that all right? Is that okay, guys?
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
I'm cool with that. But
Right.
but I'll be right back.
All right. Hold on. So join your breakout rooms. So you guys didn't join?
Nobody was in my room.
Oh, well, Mark said he'd be right back, but we'll play with this together. So why don't you give it a shot, Richard? Richard?
I really enjoy having a nice day with a good friend like yourself.
Oh, that's good.
A beautiful memory. Really enjoying good company. A glass of wine.
Now string it a little bit more together. You're using the same rhythm, which is good, but vary it a little bit.
Up and down?
Well, yeah, sometimes it can be quicker and sometimes it can be slower,
Uh,
depending.
yeah, I really enjoy a good steak, especially with a nice friend. A glass of red wine.
Yeah, that's good. I think Mark is in the room. He did join the room. Are you still invited to that?
Oh, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, why, if you would join, just give it a, you and Mark can play with this just a little bit.
My favorite thing to do was.
Uh-huh.
And so I was telling him about that, and then that's when I lost him.
Uh-oh, a little too steamy for him, maybe?
No, no, not at all.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Okay, you guys are back, and now we're back. It's like, I feel like we're on the radio. Okay, so how did it go?
It was very brief.
Okay, well, I know you talk to people all the time. So this is a good place to start because you have a captive audience when you're speaking to them on the phone or on Zoom or whatever it is.
Yes, definitely. It's a big funnel. Yeah, it's a definitely big audience. I just
Well,
need to
anybody
have
you
a more
speak to.
impact with this training here. I'm hoping to build my how can you have more of a stronger impact on it.
No, that's good. Yeah, and basically anybody you speak to is a chance for you to communicate this way. And it's just you become a much better communicator.
Yes, and it definitely reinforces it every time we get together. Yeah.
Well, good. Richard, how did it go for you?
It was good. And I mean, he wasn't on for long because he was busy, but when he got on, we had a good conversation.
Well, it again, you can use this really well, I think, with your team as well as with your clients, because it's all in how you communicate with them and the things you emphasize. That's where having that influence part really works. So we have a little bit longer on the Ask Me Anything. Any other questions?
How does NLP or what you teach increase a person's social skills?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the whole thing, Richard.
Okay. How does what you do improve a person's social skills?
Well, that's going to be a lot of it in the in the new communications model. But again, when we go back to building rapport, right? Just like I outlined it in the book, but it's really being able to lower those boundaries that we use to protect ourselves and sharing who you are and being able to share who you are. That real leaders actually you kind of get an idea that you know that person, right? So have you ever run into somebody who you just felt was a really good leader? You're on mute, Mark, in case you were talking. Richard, Mark, Harriet.
Yeah, I have.
Right. What was it about that person that you felt was something special about the leadership ability? Not the decision so much, but the person.
Like confidence, but no, not a big ego, but confidence.
Right. But how did you know that person was confident?
way they spoke.
Okay, was it the way they spoke or what they spoke about?
I think more the way they spoke.
Okay. I would suggest it's partially that, but a lot of it is also what they spoke about. They speak about their vision. They're sharing that. They don't hide it. They speak about, you know, maybe their vulnerabilities. They speak about giving other people credit as well. That's where, people feel somebody is confident when they don't feel that they have to take all the credit for themselves. Right? So those are boundaries that people who are not confident or are not leaders often have in front of themselves. They create these boundaries, and they try to be the hero all the time. They try to be it becomes very ego driven, as opposed to them taking a group of people to a certain place, or them sharing their vision. They invite you to go along with them. Does that make sense as far as the idea of opening yourself up and being vulnerable in that sense in order to bring other people with you?
Are you speaking about the vulnerability of the person speaking, or the audience they are?
Of the person speaking. Because when that person shares, remember I said, when you're sharing stories about yourself, right? And that this goes to the earlier part, Mark, that you didn't see with seeding, but it was also in the storytelling one that we it's about sharing those parts of yourself that where other people can relate to it. Now, those people who are very closed off, who won't share of themselves, they're not seen as being leaders. They may be seen as managers, but they're not seen as being leaders. Because a vast part of leadership is the ability to communicate, and the ability to communicate vision and inspire other people. How do you inspire somebody if they don't know you? Or they don't feel they know you?
That's on the contribution of and I use that word like sparingly, because I don't know the exact word contribution, but that is the on the part of the speaker, the leader, because they, like you say, they open themselves up, making themselves vulnerable. But then I also see, like, in certain culture, for lack of a better word, there's a certain culture that is also the audience that gives themselves up to the speaker, kind of the leader, and making fun of the word culture, like a cult. There are people that are speakers that have that magnetic charisma, but then also it's enabling the audience are enabling that power of the speaker by giving themselves up to them.
It starts first with the person opening themselves up. It doesn't start with, if somebody doesn't open themselves up in order to lead, you're not going to get that same type of people following. Now, it may not be that that's actually how that person is. That's the perception. They're only seeing part of that person. But that person has lowered boundaries in order to show that you should follow me. Does that make sense?
So these, it could also be, how can you say, not necessarily genuine in that sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I didn't say it's all, but there has to be an element of truth to it.
Yes,
right?
but
So it could be that some of the historical figures that we see in this. It's Hitler, right? Hitler was like, look, I was in World War I. I went through the tough times with you people. I'm like you, right? Well, no, he wasn't. He was a psychotic, lunatic. But that's how he would say, I am going through this with you. I stand for you people. That's where he's lowering those boundaries. They didn't know what he was really like, but in many ways, his experiences mirrored what everybody else was going through, right? Same thing with Stalin, same thing with, the presidents as well. There's an element that they show of themselves that resonates with people, right? So it's that lowering of that that boundary that they have, so you can not necessarily know them, although some people think they know them, but at least they get an idea that they know them. There's enough there for them to latch onto.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. Definitely.
But somebody who's totally closed off is a loner, and they don't get anybody following them. That's why if you're in a position where you're leading a team or things like that, they have to get to know you, and in order to be able to resonate with you to the point where they're willing to support you. Right? Because look, the guy who nobody wants to support, who wants to lead, is the guy standing there on the street corner with a sign yelling the end of the world is coming.
Yeah, that's definitely. I see that a lot. But yeah.
Well, that's because you live in the city.
Yes.
Right? And so that's why it's very important to know the degree to you're willing to lower those boundaries, right? And the appropriateness of it as well. Because in some situations, it's not appropriate to lower the boundaries.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Right? Any other questions, Richard? All right, anything?
No, not right now.
Richard?
To write language patterns, do you write them out?
No, never.
Wow.
Here's my take on language patterns, right? And it's something that so language patterns, and I know somehow I'm talking about martial arts again, but I was an instructor as well. Language patterns are kind of like forms, right? So are you guys familiar with martial arts forms? Katas, those types of things?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. You guys have seen it, right? So they're there as practice. They're there to teach you certain things about body mechanics, balance, all those types of things. You don't fight using the forms. You may fight if using some moves out of the forms if they come up, because you have certain muscle memory that you develop from doing forms and things like that. But you can't really fight out of forms. It doesn't work that way, right? These are exercises. Same thing with language patterns. Language patterns are essentially exercises, so you understand what's going on and how to influence somebody. In my opinion, is when you start using like these canned language patterns, it sounds like you're just trying to throw magical spells at people, right? As opposed to actually communicating with them. So if you understand how to get criteria and values, and you understand how presuppositions work, you understand how tonality works and things like that, then you don't need a pattern. Then you can just communicate with the person. Does that make sense? Richard? Richard?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, because I know, we both learned, originally with language patterns and things like that, but I found that for me, getting good at it had to do with using them. Not writing them down. What good is writing them down? Because it's out of context. So my suggestion on that would be you take a certain things like presuppositions, right? Play with that. Take certain things like tonality, play with that. Then start mixing them together. Right? So you're not doing things mechanically. I think it's when you're doing things mechanically, that's when you get stuck at a certain level. And so you don't actually master the skill set, which is communicating effectively.
Right.
So if you find yourself a little stuck in the patterns, start breaking them out and, just think in terms, I'm just going to use this, this concept, presuppositions today, or just going to use tonality today. You'll find that you'll actually be using all of them because you're used to using them, but you won't be using them in a pattern. Because too many people fall back on the patterns and then they sound like used car salesmen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Guys? Anything?
I guess the only practice will instill this into you, right? That's the only way.
Well, I don't think of it in terms of practice. I think it's just in terms of improving your communications. So play with it.
Okay, like throughout, you mean like throughout the course of my day, like when I speak with people, play with it basically. Just exactly. Yeah.
Take one skill set and play with it until you become comfortable with it. Then take another skill set and play with it. Maybe not even until you become totally comfortable with it, but maybe for a day or a couple of hours or however long you decide, right? Then go on to the next one and play with that one. The skill set is too wide and too vast to try to do it all at once. But when you take things one at a time, you'll get really good at each particular thing. They'll start to blend together very quickly. That's how you make fast progress. The people who get stuck are the people who are trying to do everything all at once, and they never get good at any of it.
Yes, that definitely resonates with me.
Yeah. And have fun with it, play with it. There's stuff that's going to work better for you at the beginning and stuff that may not. The stuff that may not, just make note of it and we can go over it again. And, it just could be that it may not have been the appropriate thing to use in the right time, or it could just be a slight tweak that you just have to do. That's all.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, any other questions before we go?
Looking forward to the video and looking forward to the next session.
That's right, because you didn't get the seating part. So I would encourage you guys to make some suggestions on what you want to cover, because it makes my life a lot easier, and I will definitely look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks for sticking in. I appreciate it. And this was a lot of fun today.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, have a good night.
Have a good night, guys. Thank you.